right, welcome back for another episode of Startup Talks, and today we have Jelani Clark of DII.
Yes.
Jelani, tell us what DII is.
So, briefly, DII stands for Decentralized Science. And this is essentially a movement that is looking to democratize and open up and provide better access points to science. Science has been really abstracted away from the general population. There are a lot of pain points that exist for scientists. So for framework, I'm a neuroimmunologist by training, so formerly trained scientist. And much like in the general landscape, scientists oftentimes don't get credited for the work that they do. There are a lot of frameworks and pain points that exist whether it's around data management, attestations, how do you leverage these assets that you generate, who gets to govern these, who gets to own these. And this exists for scientists, but in the general scientific realm, it also exists for us, right? Think about from the medical industry perspective. Ancestry.com, 23andMe, who owns that data?
You saw me raise my hand earlier.
I saw you raise that hand earlier. Who owns that? Who gets access to that? Who is monetizing off of that? And if somebody is monetizing, why do we as participants who contribute our data to this don't see any of that? So it's really applying the concept of open access, democratization, transparency, provenance that we see in like the decentralized finance framework to the scientific, STEM, medical, all branches of science. And that's what really high level what DII is.
What DII is. And so thanks for the explanation. And tell us a bit more about the organization that you work for. I said DII at the beginning, but I meant to say DII World.
Yeah.
But tell us what DII World is trying to do and what your role is.
Absolutely. So DII World is the leading information aggregation and community infrastructure hub for the decentralized science space. Our whole goal is to make onboarding into DII as frictionless as possible. So if you don't know what DII is, if you're a scientist that is looking to find solutions to the problems that you deal with day to day, if you're a science curious person, you want to become more involved in science from an educational or practical framework, we provide a platform that really allows you to learn at a very high level what are the different players in the space, what are some of the solutions that exist there. We host conferences like this, Web3 North, and all these kind of things around the world. So our whole goal is really to be that kind of social vanguard in terms of bringing people into this space. And I'm one of the executive leads there. We've been operating for about a year and a half now. And doing a lot of good. We just had a conference 2 days ago in Istanbul for around DevConnect, and we're having another one in Bangalore, India. These are in-person conferences, really trying to nucleate these DII communities around the world.
Excellent. And academia, science, these are slow-moving institutions.
Very.
And they're not they are not typically what we consider innovative industries.
Right.
And so what I want to know is how do you think DII is going to take hold in that context?
So it's interesting that you say, right? These industries that are predicated on the prospect of innovation themselves are not innovative, right? It's an interesting paradox.
It's like they've been captured or something.
It's like they've been captured.
Yeah.
And so to that actual point of capture, what blockchain integration, what DII is hoping to do through that integration, and it's not just blockchain, but it does apply it, is to give ownership back to the stakeholders in that framework, not just the entities that reap the rewards at the endpoint, but scientists in terms of if I create an innovation in an institution and I want to go then leverage that for something else, either help push forward my innovation. I can't do that currently because the institute itself owns a lot of the governance rights over the IP that I create.
For example, universities in the case of researchers.
If I do a research, with the exception of Waterloo, so shout out to Waterloo, with the exception of Waterloo, most of the times if I devise intellectual property in that university, the university owns a large chunk of that. And so I can't leverage that to either find alternative sources of funding.
Can you give us an example, about the percentage chunk that universities typically take in those transactions?
Off the top of my head, I can't give a big number, but for example, if I leave the university, so if either I get fired or I change, that IP remains at the university.
Okay, it doesn't follow you
at all.
This reminds me, not to cut off too long, but it reminds me of what artists hope to benefit from Web3, right?
It's the exact same thing.
In the film industry, right? They're aggregating all of this talent, all of these artists, and they don't get to reap the rewards of that in the long term.
A perfect example of this is the music industry.
Right.
Scientists operate under 360 deals, where you can create. You don't own the masters to what you create. It is the university, and then whoever else wants to buy into that afterwards that gets that. the concept of streaming, the concept of direct to consumer aspects of music, where your fans can help contribute, you can go directly to them, that doesn't exist yet in science. So to your point of this paradox of innovation, science is one of the oldest, most powerful industries, but it's also one of the slowest moving and archaic in terms of infrastructure. And so the application of blockchain, though yes, scientists are hard to move forward, but the smallest percentage makes a huge difference because it is so archaic.
Yes.
And just giving that power back to individuals. And again, we talk about scientists, but we can go back to like what I was mentioning before. When you sign up for Ancestry.com, you basically waive the rights to your genetics. That is your source code. That is the fundamental framework of who you are.
Kind of feeling bad about that one.
Listen, it's okay. We all make mistakes. Companies, ancestries, and these kind of things flip these for billions of dollars in effort. You don't see any of that. You have no idea how it's utilized, how many people you may have saved, how many people this is used for nefarious purposes. Not to say that it necessarily is, but you don't know where your genetics are going. You don't know where your medical data is going. And I think that's what I talk about in terms of abstraction. I think, not to say we should care, but there should be an optionality whereby if I do want to find out, if I want to see how many people I've saved, how many people my blood donation has saved, you should have the right to do so. I think it's in Switzerland or the Swiss have it where when you donate blood, you receive a text message every time you save a life, or every time your blood has been gone to save a life. Having these kind of frameworks, I think, is really important from the perspective of understanding what's being done, but also to help break down hesitancy. A lot of the issues that exist in science, or one of the major issues that exist in science, is a lot of people are not donating. And you need these kind of donations to help push forward innovation. But because of the lack of transparency, the opacity, these kind of considerations, these data breaches that we see all the time, a lot of people don't feel comfortable. I think you were the only person in the room that raised their hand for that.
I was surprised.
That data is very, me too, actually. Most people do it. Maybe they're just fronting.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of really important data that exists out there that drives innovation that people are not sharing because they don't trust the system. And when you create a permissionless system where people don't have to trust necessarily, it gives them more optionalities to say, I will contribute because I can control what happens with my data. Yeah. And therefore you can just help bootstrap innovation by that access.
Have you heard of Accelerate Estonia? You know, Estonia, the country? Their program is Accelerate Estonia?
Yes.
I had Annette Numa over about a month ago, and she actually did a podcast like this. And we were talking about the program. I find it really fascinating because they create like a kind of sandbox in their country, and they allow innovations from other countries to come in and test things. And I think of that as an interesting solution to maybe proof of concept, what you guys are doing at DII World. So
yeah, I mean, there are applications of this around the world. Interestingly enough, the second and third income countries are those that are most readily adopting concept of blockchain, but also DII. I think DII is very prevalent in Latin America. Same way still, here in North America and in Eastern Europe and Western Europe, but in India and in Southeast Asia, these are coming more online. Partially because, again, there's a mistrust in their infrastructure that exists currently, and there's a need for alternatives, right? People want to be... It's kind of the reverse of finance. People now are looking to be debanked. In science, people want to be part of the system for a variety of different reasons, but it's kind of the opposite. So it's an interesting framework that exists. And it's good. It's a good contrast, or it's a good duality to show the application of what Web3 can bring, or what Web3 can bring to existing industries. It's not just one format, the financial realm, or the other format, the decentralized finance. I think we're only touching the tip of the level of innovation that Web3 can bring in terms of providing efficiencies or just changing the infrastructures that we have now that make it more, interestingly enough, human-centric and person-centric, which is, again, a little interesting duality of digitization, abstracting the human, but really it brings us back to the human because at the level of granularity, you get to control your assets.
Yeah. I think you set up my last question very well. I asked the other guests something along these lines, but what do you see as the timeline for disruption in the scientific realm with respect to DII?
So
give us your predictions.
Predictions.
What I'm
in the next 4 to 5 years, let's say conservatively, 4 to 8 years, I think DII will be a standard, kind of like open science. Open science is a thing that everybody knows about. DII is a little bit of an extension of that. And the reason I say this is that different from what we see with other crypto narratives or other Web3 narratives, there is not a pushback from regulatory frameworks, right? DeSci as a whole works with existing publishing frameworks, Nature, the World Health Organization. We see a lot more proactive interactions between regulators and us. So there's no regulatory ambiguity, which lets us to know what the bounds of our innovation can be and push it forward and work within those bounds. So I think Rymedy, just to brush off, Rymedy is a good example. They are a Web3 infrastructure that allows for compliant biomedical services, right? They're integrated in the United States. They're compliant across the world. And it's just a framework where anybody can build on top of it. It's an infrastructure play. Then if you build on top of it, you're regulatory compliant. You can apply these blockchain tokenization standards to your medical records, your data records, all these kind of things. And so the innovation is coming quick.
Yeah.
And it's, again, regulatory compliant at base.
Yeah.
And so it sounds ambitious, but within 4 to 8 years, I think we'll see DeSci as a common theme. It's not going to be called DeSci because it'll just be called some aspect of it.
Yeah.
But that's my prediction. Maybe a little bit ambitious.
No, it's good. Ambitious predictions like this are good, and they often surprise us how much faster they even come because of the technology adoption S-curve.
Absolutely.
And before you know it, it's here. It explodes on the scene, and then people are like, "Whoa, this came out of nowhere." And it's like, no, we've been working on it hard for the last 10 years or something, right?
Exactly.
Jelani, thank you very much for your time.
Absolute pleasure.
Love the insights that you shared with us today.
Hey, if there's any other questions, feel free to reach out to me. I love to talk about this. It's kind of part of what I do. So thank you for having me.
How can people find you?
You can find me on LinkedIn, Jelani Clark, PhD. You can find me on Twitter at or X, Jelani C3. My DMs are open. My LinkedIn is open. I love to talk about this. So if you have any questions, if you want to learn more about DeSci, startup or whatever, feel free.
Thanks again.
Thank you very much.